Welcome to episode 3 of Ethnocynology. A question I get constantly is, how do archaeologists know where to dig? Like, where do you know where to find stuff? How do you find stuff? And like, what's an excavation like? And can I join? I can answer all those questions with this. Now, I know what I'm about to talk about is not a dog, but it is a giant Ice Age animal known as a mammoth. And I'm just going to do it the easy way for you. I'm not going to make a high production documentary like I had planned to. I'm just going to walk you through from when I arrived to when I left, what I experienced and how this works. Because that's honestly probably the best way to explain it to you. So without further ado, here's the Warren Mammoth Site. The Warren Mammoth Site is a mammoth site or excavation located outside Cheyenne, Wyoming. I can't give the specific locations, but it was found on a rancher's property who is a sheep rancher and he breeds sheep there. The guy's name is Doug. I don't know if he wants his full name in here, but he's a very wealthy kid. And he had a worker who was operating a track hoe. And in operating this track hoe, trying to build or dig a well for the sheep out in the field, he found what he thought was a dinosaur bone. He pulled it out, like a big round bone. Kind of like, it looked like a palantir from Lord of the Rings. Take the sound off. Let me know when you're ready.
Shooting.
You cannot die. I see.
Just a big bowling ball. And he was like, this is a dinosaur bone. I asked if he wanted to be interviewed, and he said no, so I won't name his name, but props to this guy because he dug this out, thought it was a dinosaur bone, talked to the landowner, and the landowner was like, yo, this is something. So he brought you the bone.
Yes, he did. He brought that to breakfast one morning and said, I found a fossil. It was the ball of a femur.
Right.
And it wasn't a fossil. It hadn't been fossilized yet. So anyway, we weren't sure where it was at. We had to pull the trench out. He was backfilling. And we wanted to find a few more bones, and there were fragments around.
So being as generous and smart as this guy is, called the University of Wyoming.
And then what compelled you to go to the university with it?
We called the University of Wyoming because I bleed brown and gold. I don't even think there's any other universities.
Sure.
And tried to get a hold of the archaeologist department. I didn't know anybody there. And of course, the lady I talked to, she was skeptical. Maybe it was a cow bone or a sheep bone or something like that. And she asked for some photos. We sent her some photos and she came back. She said, that looks very mammothy. That's a real archaeological term, mammothy.
Correct.
The paleontology department said, oh, this is a mammoth, and then you should probably contact the archaeology department because they are actively working on a mammoth excavation in Douglas, Wyoming, which is the LaPrelle Mammoth Site, which I'll do a future video on. I also worked there. And so a couple of professors and students went out to the site to check it out, and they found a small biface, which is a stone tool on the surface near it, and then took a couple carbon dates with samples and found out that this mammoth was 13,000 years old, calibrated carbon dating, which puts it in well within a couple hundred years, if not like 200, 300 years, of Clovis being in Wyoming. So the archaeologists were like, we're going to dig this because it could be cultural and another mammoth kill. So in the summer of 2022, I'm working at the other mammoth site at LaPrelle, and my professor pulls me aside and he was like, hey, do you want to get some sick footage of a mammoth being excavated? And I was like, absolutely. So he took me out to the site, or, drove myself, and a couple of students and volunteers were there. And this was probably one of the coolest experiences of my life, because I used to go to the museum in New York all the time that I ended up interning at later on in my life to see the dinosaurs, to see the giant bones. Like, every kid loves that. And, the opening scene of Jurassic Park where they're pulling out the velociraptor from the ground and they're using GPR, which is ground penetrating radar, which you can't see it that well, that it's kind of science fiction in the movie. But anyway, it's that. Like, I've always wanted to see that. I wanted to be the little fat kid that like gets scared of the raptor claw when Dr. Grant's like, I hate kids, and scares them. That was me at the site, except as an adult, and I wasn't scared. But what I saw was, I can't describe it. Like Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa, just like a gift coming out of just eroding out of the ground every day as you further excavated this thing. So let me talk to you about what happened when I got there. This might be boring, but I want to just explain this a little bit. When you look around the environment where this is, it's the high plains. So basically where Nebraska moves into Wyoming before you hit the Rockies. So high plains, the prairie, whatever you want to call it, with mountains and hills around. And you can see all around you, it's Jurassic era geology. I'd say that was the dominant like geological formations that were around there. Beautiful property, just absolutely stunning. The sunsets there were crazy. But the site was located a little further away from the sheep ranch, of course, out in the fields, and just out in the middle of a field in what used to be an ancient riverbed. And that's where the mammoth was excavated. I got there a day or two late, or like the second day of excavations. So they had already started taking the mammoth out of the ground. And when I got there, I walked in and just said like, whoa. When I looked down at the ground, I was like, whoa, because mammoth bones were just coming out of the ground. And you could see what was immediate to me was that there was a giant, just straight angular trench in the ground where the track hoe was digging the well. So in that giant trench where the well was then further pushed and excavated further to make a big kind of opening. And then in that opening was us sitting in the trench digging towards further into the opening where the mammoth was. So we found the femoral head of that mammoth. So we know from the femoral head, the rest of the bone has to be going, that way, the opposite direction of where the head was. So they started digging that way, and lo and behold, more bones kept coming out of the ground. And this is a careful archaeological excavation. And what's different here as a paleontologist, what they do is just dig out the bones. They like either can pedestal them, which means to dig around them, and the bones then sit on pedestals of sand, and then you take a picture of it. Or you can just dig slightly around the bones, put a cast over it, and then just expose the whole dinosaur or the piece of extinct fauna that's there and do it that way. But what an archaeologist does is carefully excavates all the way down to we do it in levels, which I'll explain later. And you're putting the bones on top of the soil so that in each unit and then quad, the unit gets divided into 1 meter by 1 meter. And then in there, you divide that into 4 quads. So you can carefully excavate each quad of the unit, each section of that unit, and write down notes, and you have a more down to it's just data heavy. Like, we're just nerds and need all the extra data. And then when you put all this data into the computer later and it all makes a big picture, you can see, wow, this is carefully excavated. So the reason we do that is because rather than just leave the bones there on the surface and take the bones out, you want to go down those 5 centimeter levels to see what else is in that quad, whether it be stone tools, more bones, pieces of bone, because we need to know that. And other things that could come up are stains in the ground from charcoal, from campfires, hearths, or even post holes from people building houses around this mammoth. So we need to check that out. I'm getting into the weeds here, but I want to just explain. We're digging towards where the bones are and have a general idea of like, here's the extent of what we're going to dig. That's all we can really do this summer. Next summer, we can do this half because it's just a lot to excavate. And if the mammoth happens to not show up this direction, oh well, or we can start digging that way a little bit. So the next day, I start digging. Actually, the day I got there, I should say. The day I got there, I immediately started taking pictures, taking videos, asking the archaeologists, what are you digging? Can you tell me about this? And I took some video on that. Okay, so what we have here is exposed mammoth bone. And you can see this is part of the bone here. Some of it probably got taken out by whatever dug this trench. But there's probably going to be more bone this way. But the way to take care of this is to put the things up on a pedestal, which means you kind of like a relief. You pull all the dirt around from the outside to just leave the bone exposed. Then we can either come in and take that out, or we can put a cast on it. And then Dan just pulled something up over here. Let's see what that is. It's cool, whatever it is, Dan. I don't. It's part of one of these. What do you think?
There's only one way to find out what it is.
And what I want to talk about majorly, just before we get into more excavation of like, how this stuff went, what is most important here is we use an electronic distance machine, which if you haven't seen that, EDM or a total station is what it's called. And a total station is what you see construction workers using on the side of the road. That thing that's on a big tripod that you put your eye into, and they're shooting a laser towards someone holding a pole. What that does is we take with a Trimble, like a very fancy GPS machine, you take a coordinate for, just establish a center of the site, or doesn't have to be the center. You can establish on the outside of a site, on the azimuth or on the corner, a geolocation, like on the entire planet, like a global positioning system point of where this excavation is. From there, you then set the total station on top of that so that you know exactly coordinates and the points taken in the site are referenced from this point on the planet Earth. Okay, so at an archaeological site, when you have artifacts, you have things you want to map in place so you can look at the data later, you use what's called an electronic distance machine, aka an EDM, so you can, or you can do, the total station is what we call it. So, I almost said Trevor. Your name is Jacob. You have a thing over here called the stadia rod. He's gonna put that down and put his trowel right there. How you doing? Cool. And then we're gonna go over here. He's mapping in a bone, something. Yeah. I'm gonna go in here, look at this, level, like that, measure, and it's gonna calculate and shoot a laser beam towards where he is. And we'll get a precise shot of like the northing, the easting, and the elevation where it is in space. So that is 443. Wait, you're mapping it in. Never mind, but yeah. So if you find evidence of a dog, say at a closed site, some people say there might not be, some people say there will be. I don't know, we'll find out. How you doing? You use that thing to map it in. Cool. All right. That was chaos, but it worked. And why that's important is like, yeah, you can just kind of do the X and Y yourself by basing with like the old school way of taking a ruler and a line level and finding it. But in this way, it's a quick and easy, and it logs it into the total station. So you can plug that into the computer later and you can see a big blow up of like where X, Y, and Z, these artifacts are in space. And you can kind of manipulate it around and see how things deposit with alluvial and whatever aeolian movements, which would be like flooding or like wind or sand or something like that blowing over it. So when I wasn't taking pictures or I wasn't interviewing people about the site, I was in there digging, and everyone gets assigned a unit. And sometimes when it's really tight, 2 people work in a unit, and you divide the quads up between you. And again, we go in 5 centimeter levels, and you'll start digging a new quad. You map that out using the EDM, and you find like where in space this quad's going to start, and you use the northwest corner or the southwest corner, depending on which one you want to use. Can't recall what we used in this one. Either way, you used one of the corners. And then from there, you map out, like, oh, I'm 50 centimeters this way, I'm 50 centimeters that way. And you start digging the bone, and you just carefully excavate down. If you find nothing, you just keep digging, and you put that dirt into a bucket and usually scoop it up with a trowel. And then you scoop that into a dustpan. Then you take that dustpan, I'm getting into the minutia here, but this is how it works. You're scraping dirt into a dustpan, then dumping that into a bucket. Okay. And then you take that bucket, and you usually have to put some kind of tag in it to say like, this is unit whatever, level 5, 50 centimeters to 55 centimeters deep. And you're taking that, and then you give it to what we call the bucket line, where then the screeners pick it up and will start taking that. And you have that tag that's on the unit or on the bucket of dirt that you have, so that they know what unit and level this belongs to. And your initials are on it. So if something goes wrong, they can come talk to you. And usually volunteers are screening, but when there's a lot of work to do, people, always hop on and help. And what screening is, and I'm just going to get into that really quick, is especially at this site, we had to do water screening, which means you take a hose and just blast the sand rather than take your hands and push the dirt through that really fine, kind of looks like netting. It's wire on a, you know what a screen looks like, right? And you can take the like sides on it and sift it yourself. Or in this case, we use the water because it's faster. And you just blast through it. Sometimes it's really tough dirt, like really tough dirt. This luckily was pretty nice and sandy, if I recall. So yeah, it was very sandy because it collapsed easy. Then people in the screens are pushing through that and they're looking for any evidence of stone or bone or seeds or charcoal or anything like that. Specifically at this site, we were desperately looking for stone because we wanted to know if this mammoth was butchered. So everyone on the screens looks through that. When they pick through the screen and there's nothing else on it, they just, put the tag into a bag and then put that into a made bag and then log it onto a, thing saying this screen was screened and there was nothing in it. And if they find something in it, they write down what was in it. That's the minutia of it. Every site's going to be different. When you work for someone else, they're like, well, here's how I do it. Make sure you burp the bag. Make sure the bags aren't in the sun. I don't care. Just like every site you get to, someone else is going to have a new way of doing it. This is why I hate CRM, because every time I work for a new company, they're like, well, that's not how I tie the string around the nail. I don't give a shit. I want the nail to be tied, the string around the nail, and if it doesn't look as great in the pictures as yours, fine, but I'm getting the same data. So chill out. That's a rant. Sorry. But at this site, this is how I learned. I learned to excavate with these people. I was very comfortable. I knew the system. Let's do it. So that's water screening. You go back I should add one more thing. You leave the screens out in the sun for them to dry. And then if there's anything else, when it's wet, it's hard to see everything in there. When it dries, you can sift it one last time, see what's in there. And if there's nothing, you dump it and the tag, that's over. So back to me digging in a hole. I'm now probably doing 3 to 4 buckets a quad, I think, maybe less. Just taking the dirt out. Depends on how big the bone is in your section, because you might only have a couple pounds of dirt as opposed to like some units where you're having like not tons, but you're having like probably 10, 20 pounds of dirt coming out of there. So we're digging, and with each quad you go deeper and deeper and you're getting down to more bones. And some of the bones lay flat on the surface. So when you're digging, I just use the example of 50 centimeters to 55 centimeters below the surface, right? Sometimes the bone will stop at like 52 centimeters and it's laying flat. So therefore I put it on that pedestal, and the further I dig down around it, the more that pedestal like raises and it kind of gets precarious, but the bones are pretty wide. So there's a base to stay on, and you dig further down around it, staying in the quads and the lines of that. And then sometimes, once you got to the ribs, like it was really intricate. There was like rib bones popping out, the skull bones and stuff, because a lot of that kind of got smashed and, over time with weathering and erosion. And you got to leave those in there. A lot of times when it's a really tiny bone, you're taking that out, putting it into a bag, and you're saying this belongs to this quad, this level, this person digging it, because you don't want that in there. It's too liable to be crushed. But at the end of the day, when you put all these points into the computer and you mapped where that bone was in time and space. Well, I guess time too. You're mapping in, longitude, latitude, and elevation where that piece of bone was. You can know later on when you put it all in a big map in the computer in the lab where it was relevant to the rest of the bones. So we're digging, and dude, more bones come up, and you're seeing femurs and humeri, and I guess only 2 humeri. Femurs, there's ribs, there's a tusk coming out of the ground, and it's like every day, and I have time lapses I can throw here on the video, but just every day you're digging there, like more and more bones came out, and it was so fucking cool. Like just bones coming out. Now, would I have loved to have seen on the mammoth tusk a human that was gored by it and a human skeleton there? Absolutely, I would have loved to see that. However, the tribes would have come shut that down real quick because it's a human body, and we have to apply to NAGPRA, or adhere to NAGPRA, which is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So if a human body were to be found here, excavations have to stop. You have to call the tribes and the coroner. They have to come check it out, and they can decide who gets to keep it, because, there's many tribes that used to live here. And then that's into the, we can talk about that another time as well. But if you find human remains, you got to stop. And then from there, that's a whole several episode podcast. So just to give you into the mindset of what happens at the end of the day, because you can't dig this all in a day. At the end of the day, you're all tired and you just want to get back. And it's 3:00 in the Wyoming sun, which is technically the high desert, high plains. So it's baking. And then we cover the site with tarps and put wood down because you don't want coyotes coming in at night chomping on it. You don't want raccoons. So I think coyotes were the bigger concern there. Vultures. And there's so many dogs excavating around. Well, they kind of are excavating too when they're digging holes, but a lot of pet dogs just hang out at site, finding shade wherever they can. And they love it because there's so much human action going around. And here we go. I'm talking about dogs. There's dogs all over the place, and I took tons of pictures of dogs. I'll put a montage of that up here too.
Because when we enter in stuff into the database, we have to associate it.
Who are you? Which one are you? Huh? You just ate something dead. You ate something dead. Different guy. This one's Ida. But it's really cute because they try to find any shade they can. And they usually all huddle together in the shade, and it's kind of adorable. But a risk of that, and why I didn't bring my dog here, is because I don't want to use that word, but he's special. And he'll just plow through all the bones and like lay down on them and stuff, or take one. And I just didn't want to risk it. So didn't bring him. But anyway, at the end of the day, you cover the site up, you put the tarps down, and then we all drive back to the campsite, which in this case happened to be at the sheep breeding farm. And there was like a barn there with a kitchen and all sorts of stuff, and we could cook food there. And at the end of the day, you just hang out, sit in the circle, or we're just sitting in a garage because it was hot out. And you just sit around and drink beer. Some people volunteer to cook dinner that day, usually have KP, which if you've been in the military is like, kitchen duty. It's kind of just easy because someone's like, I got it today. And then you hang out, and at night we would drive around to the rest of the site or on the property and see these like beautiful sunsets. And of course, we're archaeologists. We would walk to the top of these hilltops and look for stone circles. And stone circles are rocks that used to line hide structures. So probably teepees or other hide-like structures that were up there. And you can see the remains of that through that. And usually you can dig in those and find more tools and things like that, or, household. Occasionally you might find beads, but probably more likely some stone flakes and things like that. And a lot of them are sacred. If it's a really big thing, like you don't want to touch it, or when you look at it from the sky, it looks really cool. And those sometimes are called medicine wheels or medicine circles. You don't want to do that. But yeah, so then every morning you go back to the site at like 8, you could eat breakfast, you make your lunch for the day, bring it out to site, get back to the site, you take the tarps off, and you just keep digging and digging. And dude, every day more and more came out. And it got to a point where the concentration of bones in the middle became so intense that like several people had to lean over from other units and take like toothpicks and toothbrushes and like dental picks to like kind of get all the dirt out. Cause our goal was to not excavate each bone and take it out as we went. We wanted to leave all the bones pedestaled so that you could take you could take a drone picture at the end of the excavation to see what the whole thing looked like. And you wanted to take pictures of it, as many as you could. But again, some bones were too fragile or too precarious, and we had to take those out. But the majority of it, you could see, the tusks, the humeri, the femora, the ribs, the spinal column, like all sorts of stuff. And the tusks were easily the coolest. And me and the state archaeologist, Spencer Pelton, I remember being like back to back, like Mace Windu and Obi-Wan in that scene in Attack of the Clones, like just huddled together, kind of squatting, trying our best not to touch each other, or bump into each other, I should say, and knock each other over onto the bones while we're carefully excavating. And it just got so precarious at times, but so fun. And in the middle, it was the bones were so tightly concentrated in the middle that we had to take this big grid that we made out of rope and string. And you set it over the bones, and you could look at it and take kind of like not color by number, but a grid system, really. Where in each grid you could be like, and we had an artist, Tyson Arnold, help us with this, draw the bones on where they are in this grid. And then we could put that to the rest of it because it was really intricate. The rest of the bones you can kind of draw, sketch them if it's just one big bone in the unit, kind of have a big cylinder in the unit, like especially if you're in the middle of a femur. But we had him do that, and I got several pictures of like them all doing that, and I called it like a Wyoming puzzle because it just looked so cool. Like it was, I can't describe to you how cool this is, and I'll put some time lapses up in the video and stuff. But so we pulled the bones out the other day. We got these all excavated, and what we're doing right now is laying out a grid system so you can map the bones in on paper here. So you have to lay this out systematically. You can see she's going down there and making a really accurate measurement. That will translate to the paper that Tyson is putting on there, or that he's drawing on there. And then you can take this data and put it in the lab, and you can, correspond it with the photos later. That'll work. But let's see. Yeah, we screened every day. We went back to site. Had fun, cooked dinner, went and excavated more stuff. Some days we just like got lit. Other days we just hung out. Any site, there's like stuff like that. And then I think we all just hung out on my bus roof and talked about stuff like that. But you'd go back to site. New people came in, and like people all want to come see the site. So like other volunteers came in, and people that professors knew from school, and you get new perspectives and you see how people dig. But the main thing of this was I saw everybody that came into this site just looked at it and like took a deep breath and was like, whoa, because it's really cool. You don't always see a mammoth dug out, a complete mammoth. Anyway, we're all digging, and it gets to like the end of the session where we found all the bones that we could and what we planned to dig. And I took several videos like of people holding the camera while I talked of like, here's how you find excavations. And this is why they wanted me on the site, because I could talk about this stuff in like because Nat Geo can come in, or Highlights Magazine, or, Theo Vaughn could come in and be like, what y'all digging? And like not really know, especially Nat Geo or things like that. They don't exactly know how the minutia of a site works and how to excavate. And they ask like generic questions and stuff like that. But I was able to answer the questions that I know people would want to know from an archaeological perspective, and also be like, they probably want to know this, or people don't understand this. At the end, before we finished the excavation and pulled all the mammoth bones out, which is a whole thing in itself, what we did is take points. You take pictures of like nails that are around the mammoth and around the site, put, flagging tape on. I'll just put the video here.
So this is called photogrammetry, and this is like essentially making a 3D model of a map of bones. So the way you do that, you take a bunch of pictures around the bones, and you can see the screen control points, which helps you stitch all the pictures together, give you the 3D model, and you can see the bones in like 3D space. So now, as I said, you take a hammer in the points, label them with green flagging tape, then take what's called an electronic distance machine, which sends a laser to a level, and you can see exactly where north, east, and in elevation an artifact is, or in this case, where the nails are. Use a laser to get really accurate, put it on the wall. And the last step would be taking all of the pictures you can in a 360 around the bones. And finally, here's the last one with the drone and what it will look like in the lab. And now, thanks to modern archaeological science, we have a complete digital footprint that we can manipulate in 3 dimensions of where this Columbian mammoth once laid in the ground.
Hell yeah. Anyway, so that's how that works. You can stick it into your computer, and the software of the computer can stitch all that together, and you have a giant 3D model that you can move around, kind of like Tony Stark and Iron Man, of the mammoth in space. So that way, rather than just like in the 80s or 90s, you just drew a picture of it. Now we have like a 3D image of it that's pretty cool. Now I think you can do that with an iPad. There's some software, you just put this little thing on the back of an iPad and scan it around the bones, and it can map all that for you. Like, the future's crazy, dude. And then there's a whole aspect of archaeology called geoarchaeology, which studies the geology of an archaeological site. And my professor, Todd Servilla, took a video of him explaining that here.
This is quaternary fill on top of it, okay?
Okay.
And if you follow this contact, it comes up and 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 up to where you pretty much have bedrock at the ground surface. Okay, this is that volcanic ash I'm talking about. It's a Oligocene.
But essentially, like, he can show you through, like, looking at that trench that was dug with the well trench with the track hoe, you can see, like, different layers of soil that were deposited from different flooding events from either the Ice Age ending or like another flood later on. And you can see how this thing was deposited.
Down, 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 down. Here. And then, right, there's the bedrock. Yeah. Right?
And it's very cool. Goes way over my head, but that's geoarchaeology.
It's super fucking bioturbated. Comes down.
So the bioturb bringing
It's
this dark
here.
sand down.
Right.
Got it.
And it's all throughout this white making this contact between the light and the dark hard to define and kind of
Okay.
just hard to see.
Once we were done excavating for the year, what happens is the state curator was there, like the person where all these bones are going to go into the state repository under the anthropology department in Wyoming. And we had to basically take the bones extremely carefully and like lift them up and be like 1,
2, 3.
605.
as like safely as possible, or if you could stick a board under them, that was the best way to do it because these are brittle. They'll crumble. And take those and put them onto a board, and then you wrap them in bubble wrap, and then you took tape and taped them around there to make them just as tight and secure as possible. And then they were taken from the site, put very carefully into a car with more bubble wrap or a truck, driven very slowly to the University of Wyoming, which is probably like an hour and a half away, and then brought to the repository where they now are stored in a climate-controlled facility and often taken upstairs to Todd Serval's lab to be excavated. They take more of the dirt out from around them if they were casted. Casting is when you essentially, like when you break your arm and make a cast, you do that to bones. So you put paper towels over the bone and then put plaster casts over top of it, which you probably see with dinosaurs and stuff in the museum. And then you cut from under that, flip the bone and put it onto the board, strap it down with bubble wrap and tape and bring it back. And then that's brought to the lab and carefully excavated out of there with like fine picks and stuff like that to get to the bone, just in case there's stone tools or something around the bone in general, or just to, get the dirt off the bone. So I guess I need to start wrapping here of this, and just to keep it simple. Through all the screening, through all the excavations, the careful excavations of pulling it down. I remember paleontologists want to just dig the bones out and take the bones. They don't care for anything else around it, which is fine if you're digging up a dinosaur because there's no stone tools around it. But this was to be carefully excavated in a processual manner to find all the data you could on anything around the mammoth. And at the end of the day, through all the screens, through all the excavation, even if it was very close to humans arriving in Wyoming, there was no evidence of stone tools or any human culture associated with this mammoth. It just happened to be a bull elephant that died ass up in a stream. And apparently elephants like to die in streams if they kind of go off and do their thing. So I guess they get thirsty and want to drink, and then they just roll into it and die. I don't know how that all works, but you can look that up too. Another thing, that if they breed mammoths and clone mammoths, I would like to know that data. A lot of people are just like, I want to see one. Yeah, I want to know what it's like when they suffer and die from an atlatl going through its chest. I really don't. I wouldn't want them to die. But I swear, when they clone mammoths, you're going to have to stop archaeologists from just absolutely destroying and butchering them to see what it's like.
In that paper they said most people can't kill elephants. Their arrow had 35 joules there. So he needs 40? No, you need above 88, which you already got above 88 in the bison experience.
Fuck yeah.
One, or savings.
Merrick.
Hell yeah, brother. Okay. Reporting. My tent.
I'd also like to know how they interact around dogs, see how that works. I'd also like to know, their social behavior, how they interacted. Was it very similar to elephants or very different because it's different climates and stuff? Why did they go die by streams just like elephants? That's stuff that I would like to know through mammoth cloning, but I'm against it in certain ways. Some ways I'm very for it. Let me know in the chat or in the comments what you your thoughts on that too. Because I guess what I want to say is I don't want to see a mammoth like born and its like leg is like shrunk and it's like kill me. Like that's our fault. Like I don't want that to happen. And you got to breed it from an Asian elephant back to a mammoth. Any amount of things, it could catch COVID. It can give us some kind of ancient COVID and we all die. Who knows? Let me know in the comments. That's probably an exaggeration. Don't quote me on that, but I'm a little against it in some ways. And like, what if it's got, no eyeball? It's just like, I don't know. And we're doing it because we never stopped to think if we should. We were just concerned if we could, I don't know about that. So anyway, no stuff was found at the site. I can do another video on this later, like how more in depth the excavation was and like how this worked and stuff. And, if you have other questions, I have so much footage. So like shoot me an email, david@davidandhow.com. Leave comments in the chat below. Shoot me an email, message me on Instagram. What are other things you'd like to know? Because I have so much footage of this. And yeah, at the end of the day, though, this was a Pleistocene excavation. So it was, just to sum up, this was a mammoth that died close to the time that humans arrived in Wyoming. And what we did was carefully excavate it using units and quads and taking systematic data of where this mammoth was in space, and I guess time through carbon dating, and understanding how it died. So that's the extent of the site now. I think there's tons of research going on with it, just in terms of like why you find a lot of elephants or dead mammoths along rivers here in Wyoming. The Platte River, I'm pretty sure, is like littered with mammoths. Don't go digging there for them. Or if you do find some, call the anthropology department, because then you can take part in a big excavation like this. That's really fun. I just want to give a shout out to Doug for calling the school and allowing us all to come out. Did you expect all of this to happen here?
I was hoping it would happen.
You were hoping? Okay.
Yes. They said they needed funding and they were able to secure some grant money. And I told them, of course, we want this out. We'll underwrite it, but do what you want. We're going to get the mammoth out, and it's going to be the University of Wyoming's.
And he even donated because he could keep these if he wanted. He could take both the tusks and like put the tusks over the front doorway like a Viking warlord if he wanted to, because they're his. They belong to him on his land. But he was chill enough to be like, no, take them. Do all the studying you can. Because once you're a millionaire and have that much money, like what else are you going to do? Like just let the school come out. And it's more press because then people can come to his property and check it out. The governor was supposed to come one day. Like it was crazy. So I guess the last question would be, a lot of landowners, when something like this is found, just want to keep it. But you're willing to donate, I guess most of it or all of it, to the university. What made you do that?
It's just so important. You'll never see another thing this, maybe in your lifetime. And the whole state can enjoy this, and all the students, and there'll be researchers coming from all over the country and the world to look at this mammoth because they compare things, they learn things. So it's part of that education, and we believe in that. And I don't want to sell it on eBay to make some money that buy me about 2-3 tanks of gas. Right. It's just priceless for the University of Wyoming to have it. And if I understand right, they've never been able to do a dig 100% themselves. They've helped with a lot of digs, but this is the first one where they've had a mammoth where start to finish, from the first plan to the last report.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate you.
You bet.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
Those are easy.
Yeah, that was the Warren Mammoth Site. I'll probably make more videos or a more in-depth video on this later on, and we can talk about it more on the podcast. But in terms of excavating and in terms of ethnocynology and dogs and stuff, I did mention dogs with them being around site. If you were to find a dire wolf or you were to find dogs at a site, that is exactly what you would do. The same thing. Carefully excavate down around the bones, pedestal them, and look for any evidence of stone tools or anything like that. Carefully take them out of the ground after photographing them and mapping where they are. Bring them back to the curation facility or the lab and look at them to see if there's any gnaw marks or cut marks, to see if they were eaten, anything like that. Anyway, that's the Warren Mammoth Site. Next time I will talk about the Laprelle Mammoth Site, but maybe next week we'll just talk about some dogs first and take some topics from the chat so we can keep it relevant to dogs. But anyway, thank you very much. You can get my merchandise on davidandhow.com/store. I got stickers, shirts, and you can buy the art prints that I had in the lecture and on my Instagram. You can buy those there too. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a comment here below on YouTube or on Spotify. I think you can leave comments now, something like that. Just let me know how you like the podcast, and please support the APN, subscribe to the APN, follow that podcast on Apple there as well, and Spotify. So thank you very much. See you next week.